PowerPoint slides, so I will be using this microphone and on this one.
Londra'da şey çok iyi, sağlık turizmi deniyor. İşte gidiyorsun Mayo Kliniğe, gidiyorsun Dipikek, Özal'ın şeyini yapmışlar. Benim de babam Londra'da ameliyat oldu, oradan biliyorum. Bütün patient records internette. Çok iyiler, adam onu söylüyor. İşte bu sayede diyor internette hastanın şeyini
Distinguished guests, thank you for having me. This is my third trip to Turkey, and every time I come to this country, I am deeply moved and impressed by the intellectual discussions, by the vision not only for the country but for humanity, by the way that people talk about something like computing and information technology and its possibilities for increasing social dignity, the depth and the value of society, and the way that you bring deep values in the society to bear on strategic planning for digital Turkey. I learned from all these things, and this is why I continue to return. I have a great number of slides, which I will go through very quickly for reasons of time, but I would suggest that we could crowdsource translation of these slides if anyone is interested to have them in Turkish. I am from the National Center for Digital Government, which I founded and direct. And I have been interested in the evolution of the state, the nation state, in the technological age. Since that time, and in direct relationship, we have seen a growth in the US and around the world of wiki-government. This is to bring in social movements in government, social media in government. Others are writing about the power of networks. This is a book cover about globalization and connections across countries. In my work with the World Economic Forum, I chair the Global Agenda Council on the Future of Government. This is a report that we produced last year. These are some of the topics in the report. It's available online. It's translated into Arabic and into Russian, but not yet into Turkish, but it's available in at least 3 languages. A very important part of that report is about open government and open data, the civil service for the 21st century, social enterprise in developing countries, as well as issues of cybersecurity and government architecture. I want to make a few points. When we focus on social media, it is easy to forget institutions, but institutions are absolutely critical because they encode procedures, routines, expertise, and rules. And so when we are moving at a very rapid pace, we need a way to make things stable, and it is the institutions in our government that help to bring stability. Many people have thought that the state would be less important because citizen power and citizen engagement would lead to much more amplification of civil society, whilst governments would be shrinking. We see that this is not the case. The economic downturn around the world shows the importance of governments, the disaster, and my condolences and deep thoughts to your country for the recent earthquake go out to all of you. These also show the importance of the government and its response. So bureaucratic institutions need to modernize. They are not going away. And the civil servants in them also need to modernize. So we have 3 things: digitally mediated institutions, citizen engagement and the power of civil society, and the state. First example, open government. These may seem like funny or humorous slides to you. In the United States, these are acts of political speech on YouTube, on Facebook. About 4 years ago, the Obama campaign was the first campaign really to fully use social media. All of these could go live. These were not sponsored by the government. These were created by citizens and put up online as part of the civic discourse. These are more light ones. There are more serious ones as well. During that election, and we're going to see it again, we're already seeing it, we saw a remarkable use of email out to 13 million people, social networking sites.
More than 15 of them were engaged by this campaign. There were almost 3 million friends on Facebook of Obama, friends on MySpace, nearly 250,000 Twitters, and this was 4 years ago. We also saw, because money and campaigns are very much intertwined in the US, that contributions online were enormous. And this has already started again, getting these contributions online. And we were able to connect contacts online with cell phone numbers to target individuals. We celebrated this in the US because we are pretty happy with our form of government, although we know that democracy has a lot of work within it. Imagine the same kinds of tools in the hands of other types of political leaders. These tools could be used for any purpose. The Facebook page that was developed became the platform for the election, for the campaign, for a national conversation. There was outreach to a number of different communities. We have many ethnicities in the United States. We specifically reached out to them. The networking included things like 50,000 photographs of the president and his family on Flickr so that people could become familiar with the family. It was an unusual thing for us to think about having an African American president. We wanted to see his wife, we wanted to see his children. The photographs were quite important. They had a presence on Second Life, which is a virtual community. They were able to counter messages online. Advertising was spent online. The use of YouTube was predominant. One of the most important speeches during the campaign was President Obama's speech on race, when he was accused of letting his race preempt his thought to serve the country. Almost 7 million people watched that speech on YouTube. The virtue was, if you didn't see the speech on television, you could watch it anytime by connecting to YouTube. If you wanted to watch it more than once, you could watch it. If you wanted to send it to your friends or to colleagues, you could do that. It was a very different way of having a speech or having words available to the public. People began to refer to this and other videos. To have tried to do this through television in my country would have cost millions and millions of dollars. On YouTube, it was absolutely free. These were the tools that were used to organize volunteers for the campaign, and these kinds of instruments and procedures and practices are now very similar to the ones that are being used to organize social movements around the world. So we're seeing this ecology of tools and how they are being used in political processes in a variety of countries. There are many institutional developments. I won't go into them here, but the journey in the US has been a long one. And we are seeing similar trajectories in other countries. Where will we organize e-government? Who will be in charge? Do we need a chief information officer? How will we handle the budgeting of these projects? Similar questions that come up in every country. One of the things we've worked on that has nothing to do with social media, but very important, is a mapping of the government. So here you have a map of every ministry in the government and all of the major functions. And we began to ask, where are we collecting the same data many times? Where are we building the same systems in different parts of the government? Where are we spending the same money over and over to get essentially the same thing? So we're able to use technology to get a view of the government as a whole and to be able to manage it more carefully and to drive down costs. Here's an example of the number of different ministries and programs in the US government that make grants. Similar procedure, similar activity, but done by more than 20 different programs, all using different systems, all using different data requirements, all using different rules. We have begun to collapse these business processes, not into one, but to think about them in a rational way. And you see here a driving down of costs, but also a simplification for the public and for businesses, so that when they are interacting with the government, They don't see hundreds of different processes. They're seeing something more streamlined. When the Obama administration began, go to open government, this was one of the signatures of the administration. And as you have heard from our first speaker, and now in the open government partnership around the world, the focus is on transparency, participation, collaboration. The other bullet points were part of the main points of the administration. You see some that reflect your own priorities, investments in science and in science education, building out the infrastructure, broadband access nationwide, driving economic growth by deploying that infrastructure, and making government information available for a variety of reasons. Here was the original data.gov website. In the United States, one thing that is different from England, for example, is that we have always considered government data to be public data, and unless it is data that deals with security, we would make it available to the public. But it wasn't easy for the public to get it. The impetus for data.gov in this country and in other countries is to put the information online in a way that can be downloaded and can be used fairly easily. We also built something in the US federal government called apps.gov. We found that many different ministries and programs were buying software that the government already owned, or were buying competing software. This is a lot of money. Much of it could be put online in dictionaries, and government servants could find it, download it, and use it. This was an enormous cost saver. More innovations. On the bottom left, you see our Defense Department. It's a new idea portal. They solicit ideas from the public for how to do things better. On the bottom right is the Office of Science and Technology Policy blog. The idea there is to interact with the public and to get expert ideas, like many that we've heard in this room today, on a range of science and technology policy issues. There are many, many of these websites. On the top, the orange is a business.gov portal that has been quite important for new business creation, for giving tools to businesses, how to raise money, what regulations apply to them, how to create a business plan, all sorts of information that any business can use to operate better. So these are ways the US government has been building. Here's Malta, tiny country that has decided to become an ICT hub. They have a population of less than 500,000, but they have decided to become a freight transshipment point, a financial center, a tourist destination, and they are using e-government services as a way to make themselves the most desirable provider of these things. They are creating an intensive information society and economy. Some of the issues that come up that we've heard today are access. Who has it? Who doesn't have it? Is it affordable? And civil service readiness. We can build infrastructure. We need government servants who know how to use this infrastructure to benefit the public. In Asia and the Pacific, other developments, and these are just examples. Indonesia building intelligent airports. Vietnam searching with remote sensing satellites. The Philippines starting to connect its offices, its government offices, and its schools via the internet. Singapore, the Prime Minister chats on Facebook in order to interact more with the public. You can see these boundaries changing rapidly. We see a role for citizen co-production of service, but this raises a question, and we see examples all around the world. How much citizen engagement do we really want? When is there too much? When is it appropriate? When is it not appropriate? We are at early stages right now, but these are the kinds of questions that are emerging. And how do we turn engagement into problem solving for the government, for the society? Who's online? Who do they represent? Are we hearing all of the voices we need to hear online? If we look at the people who don't have access, who are not in the online conversation, how are we going to bring them in? Do we just wait for them to be connected? Governments have a responsibility to make sure all the voices are heard. The open government movement, right to information legislation, someone has mentioned new legislation has been passed in Turkey. These kinds of legislative acts are going on around the world. The building of transparency and accountability is very much a disruptive and a transformative force. Countries like India, Kenya, Brazil are using citizen engagement, often by SMS text through the phone, to expose corruption, expose inefficiencies, usually at the site where they are occurring. So the information is timely. We hope it is accurate. That's an important question. Open data portals are being launched in many different countries. Open government data feasibility studies are going on in still other countries. Second example, citizen engagement. How many of you are familiar with Ushahidi? Some of you, I see a big hand. If you are not, and if you go online, please go into Google or your search engine and type to gather information in order to help rescue efforts after the earthquake. This information is being supplied by experts, by government workers, by NGOs. It's also being generated by citizens, by individual people using their connection through the cell phone or the smartphone or the computer. And what we can do is compile this information to start creating maps. You see on the one hand a map that was created in Haiti after their earthquake. The map with the red dots was targeting voting rights abuses in Sudan. There's voting going on right now in Liberia. Similar maps are being developed. These turn out to be quite important acts of transparency, and the visualization tools give it even more force. This is an environmental map tracking various wildlife issues in Africa. These kinds of maps are being used all over the world, and they are transformative. Here are some of the ways Ushahidi's been used to make crime maps, to make environmental maps, voting abuse maps, voter reporting maps. Here's a map after the oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, where people could report what they saw in terms of animals, birds, fish, take photos and upload them. It was a way of very quickly ascertaining the situation. So we had many organizations working. Let's go back. What did we learn from the use of Ushahidi, this kind of platform in Haiti? We learned that a lot of information was coming in. It wasn't always easy for NGOs to use this information because we don't have a good way to link right now this very current floods of information and organizational routines and practices. There are procedures that institutions use, but they don't know how to match them up very well with Twitter feeds, for example, or with SMS text messages. We need to develop these procedures so that we can capitalize on this kind of information. Some dangers that I think are quite important. One, the Commons is closing. Some of you may have seen this in Wired magazine last summer. The web is dead. If you count up the apps that you're using and the tools that you're using, more and more of them are proprietary. Fewer and fewer of them are on the World Wide Web. We're using the internet, but we're not using the web. So that has implications for cost, for availability, for open data. I'll go quickly through this. Hyper-surveillance and cybersecurity. These are pictures of cameras. We're creating a world where cameras and surveillance are everywhere. Every time we swipe a card, every time we carry our cell phone with the geocoding left turned on, we are leaving traces. Those traces are collected, they are compiled, usually not for nefarious reasons. In the US, it's for consumer analysis, but there's also a great deal of political analysis. And make no mistake, social activists have been very good at using social media. States are becoming just as good at using social media. So this is an area that is developing very rapidly. Here's the US State Department The US is on record supporting internet freedom, but it has become mixed up with regimes that the US might want to destabilize, to be very frank. There's a lot of writing about this. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. Our discussions with China about trade and openness of information have become entangled as the US fights for its IT firms in China. Google is in many countries brought into conversations about what information it will make available, what information it will censor. It may be an American company, but it's a global actor, just as all the large IT companies are. And so they find themselves working in very different political environments, trying to make decisions about, literally about human rights and life and death when they're a search engine company. But of course, they've become much, much more than that. Online free speech. The key here is that the new chessboard of 21st century statecraft is very much about digital tools, social media, information online, and the mining of that information. Civil society, the French have said, we must support cyber dissidents in the same way that we supported political dissidents. It's simply not that simple. We don't support all dissidents in all countries at all times just because they're using internet tools. It makes no sense. And very often, countries are pushing their strategic interests under the banner of internet freedom. So we need a way to disentangle all of these exciting developments. This is a picture of a young man who developed software that the US State Department was using. It was software meant to break through surveillance systems. It would protect dissidents, protect their conversations so that they couldn't be monitored. Unfortunately, it turned out that the software didn't work well. It was in use in countries where people were banking their lives on it, but there wasn't enough scrutiny to the software. So, here's an example from Venezuela of Hugo Chavez, who has greatly embraced social media. He twitters very actively. There are many groups on social media that are built around the Chavez regime. He has said the revolution must appropriate the technology. They counter Twitter, so social media becomes part of the battleground of different political groups. Finally, governments no longer need to think about simply censoring Facebook or YouTube or certain speech. They can do very precise, customized filtering based on an individual's search habits and behaviors and individual sites. And so for each person, the level and type of censorship may be different. And in most societies, you won't even know that it's happening. Facebook now returns different news on your page based on your habits. You didn't ask it to do this, it developed software to do this for you. If you search on Google, the returns you get will be different from the returns the person next to you gets. Why? Google is customizing itself around your behavior. And most social media firms are doing this. So this kind of very precise filtering is going to be more and more prevalent. In China, people are being paid to Twitter positive things about the government. They are paid 50 cents a Twitter, call them the 50-cent party. So these tools can be used for a variety of purposes. This does not mean at all that open data and open government and transparency are not very important, but we have a range of issues here that we need to look at. We are pretty convinced that social media had a role to play in the Arab Spring. We know it helps social activists to coordinate their activities. What we don't know is whether it's particularly helpful in forming new governments and in forging compromise and building the depths of new political societies. So getting people together in a protest is one thing. Doing the hard work of building a government is not. We know that social media played a role in the London riots. Most of us would not support those. In fact, there was a discussion very briefly in England about whether they should turn off the internet. in order to make it difficult for people to coordinate. They didn't do it, it's against their values, but every country has this capability. The Occupy Wall Street movement is something that many people are supporting. Well, with social media, we can occupy everything. The question is, should we? So, to conclude, these ecosystems offer many, many possibilities for innovation, but the pioneer era is quickly becoming over. And what we will need to do is what has been mentioned today, which is to use the basic values of a society and to develop the public policies that are going to forge institutions that will make sense in a digital age. Thank you. And now, our next speaker.